Many abduction cases include a face-to-face encounter with Greys. Among the most credible was the incident reported by 4 college friends after a harrowing trip in the summer of 1976. Betty and Barney Hill's abduction experience in September 1961 was the first such case reported in the United States. But in the following decades, accounts of alien abduction became increasingly common. Few stories were as sensational as the experience reported by 4 friends who took what was supposed to be an ordinary camping trip. To those who catalog such reports, this UFO encounter is known as the Allagash Incident. In the summer of 1976, art students Charlie Fultz, Chuck Rack, and twins Jack and Jim Weiner traveled north from Boston into the wilderness of Maine. For nearly a week, the trip was everything they hoped it would be, a carefree escape from city life. On the 5th day, they camped near Smith Pond, an isolated, stump-filled swamp. It was a perfect spot for night fishing. It was also the place where their lives would change forever.
There was no moon that night. It was real dark, and we didn't want to get lost. So we said, well, the thing to do is make a big fire so we can see it, and then we know which way to paddle when we want to get back to camp later.
And it was quite large, but we cleared around the fire, so there was no problem. And these flames were leaping a good 3 or 4 feet up into the air.
With their makeshift lighthouse aglow, the 4 men left their campsite behind. They paddled several hundred yards out into the pond, headed for a night of fishing they would never forget, and one they would later illustrate in their artwork.
I remember being in the back of the canoe, paddling leisurely. The 2 twins were in the middle. Charlie was in the front. And I remember they were having a conversation, and I was focusing on the night and the lake and the water. And I began to feel observed.
And then all of a sudden, Chuck Rack, who was at the back of the canoe, said, holy mackerel, what the is that? And I turned around and looked, and there was this huge, bright light that was coming out of the trees. It seemed like it was rising out of the trees. At first, we thought, well, it's got to be an airplane or something, right? So we watched it for a few seconds and realized that it wasn't an airplane because it wasn't making any sound at all. It was strange, very strange.
It was a bright, luminous yellow-white, and changing from that color in a very fluid, liquid kind of a way. And we were very, very fascinated. I was in a state of extreme euphoria. I remember just feeling, wow, this is fantastic.
It was just alive. And when it was nearest us, about 100 yards away, it paused. And when it paused, I said to the fellows, I said, I'm going to shine the flashlight and see what it does.
The instant he flashed his flashlight, this thing sent this beam of light out to us. And we were in a 16-foot aluminum Grumman canoe, which in the pitch black of night lit up like a Roman candle. We must have looked like this object just waiting to be approached on this lake.
And all I can tell you is what was going through my mind was just exhilarating expectation. Just, this is fantastic. This is something we can communicate with. It's tempting to communicate with us.
I was completely shocked, and especially shocked that it reacted as quickly as it did, which told us there was some type of intelligence about it. And as soon as this light came out, this thing started moving, and so we thought, well, you know, this is real. This is really happening. This is not a figment of our imagination. I mean, we've got to deal with this situation now, because within a few seconds this thing is going to be right on us.
I wasn't even interested in this thing anymore, other than I didn't want to be as close to it as I was.
I remember paddling as fast as I could, and Jack saying, "It's getting closer, it's getting closer."
And then it was gone. The next thing they remembered, they were back on shore.
And I thought, well, that's it. We've lost our chance. We've let it slip through our fingers. And I observed it leaving and just gradually faded out.
Exhausted, the four men stumbled back to their campsite. There they found the remains of their makeshift lighthouse, the fire that had been built to last for hours, the fire that was now just a pile of charred embers. At the time, no one gave it much thought, though it would later play a large role in their sighting. That night, nothing more was discussed, not the fire, not the unknown object that had chased them only moments before. Sleep was the only thing on their minds. For years, the friends rarely talked about that strange night. Then, in 1978, memories of the sighting began to resurface. Jim Weiner had developed temporal epilepsy after a car accident and suffered periodic seizures. These fits were often triggered by sleep deprivation, and by 1980, Jim was definitely not sleeping well. Vivid nightmares had become a perpetual torment.
All I remember is seeing vague figures, anthropomorphic in shape, but they did not seem human to me. They were around me, and they were either doing things with my genitals, or they were prodding me with some types of instruments. There was an extreme feeling of malevolence. I mean, I was absolutely always felt terrified in this situation.
For a time, Jim kept his nightmares secret. Then he confided in his brother. Jack Weiner's reaction was totally unexpected.
So he starts telling me this, my nightmare, on the phone, and I go, holy mackerel, I've been having the same nightmares. What is going on here?
There was no apparent explanation, but Jim was getting worse, his doctors growing more concerned. Repeatedly, they asked Jim what was wrong, and he finally revealed the nightmares. A psychiatrist working on the case said it sounded like an abduction experience. The doctor suggested that Jim speak to Ray Fowler, a UFO researcher. Jim repeated his story. Fowler took it seriously. Later, the other three also underwent hypnosis. Finally, 4 years after the incident, the details of that terrifying August night would emerge. When four college friends set off for a camping trip in August of 1976, they never dreamed they would end up at the epicenter of one of the most famous cases in UFO history. They all remembered paddling onto a pond and seeing a spectacular light in the sky. Then it came closer, far too close for comfort. The next thing the men recalled was standing on shore. Only later would they suspect that something more sinister had taken place. Regression hypnosis revealed that the four friends had apparently endured a horrific episode known as an alien abduction. It began with the menacing approach of a UFO.
One of the things I remembered very clearly was Jack saying that it's gaining on us. And I remember suddenly being enveloped in this tube of light. And I remembered looking up, and I was thinking about, what the heck is that up there? You know, like, what's up there? And that took a few seconds, and then I looked back again, and Chuck Rack's gone. The last thing I remembered was having both hands on the side of the canoe, looking out at the water to see if Chuck was in the water, and then not seeing him and thinking, oh my God, you know, what happened to Chuck? And then looking up, and then the next thing I remembered was this just intense feeling of almost like I was coming apart or something. That's the only way I can describe it. Then the next thing I remembered was being on my back in this hazy environment, which was just like this nightmare that I'd been having.
All four friends seem to recall a similar traumatic experience.
I'm lying on my back, and I'm disoriented. I'm not sure where I am. As I'm forcing and struggling to get up, a face appears and looks straight down at
They reminded me of insects. I remember thinking, my God, these things look like bugs. They had like large eyes, almost like ants have. They could have been goggles for all I know, but and they had some kind of clothing on, like spandex. I became focused on this thing's hand and realizing that it was not a hand like ours at all. And this one had me by the wrist and he was holding my arm up and he had something else in his hand. But I didn't like the looks of it. And I remember thinking, oh boy, here we go. This is it. I got 5 seconds to live. They're going to cut me open. They're going to dissect me, whatever. I just want to get out of here. Get me out of here.
It would take hours under hypnosis before the four men fully detailed the alien examinations. Later, they recalled the peculiar events that brought them back down to Earth.
They moved us again into this other space, this room. Then this area in front of me started changing somehow. It was doing something. It was some type of machine or something. It was very strange. And the last thing I remembered thinking was, here we go. I don't know what's going to happen next, but something is happening.
Under regressive hypnosis, I remember the aliens trying to put me in the canoe. There was one of them standing in the canoe over me, trying to adjust my position in the back of the canoe, and another one was sort of waist deep in the water right next to me. And then they tried to position Jim Wiener in front of me, but he's heavier, and they were having a hard time with him. And then the other two were beamed right on land, and then Jim got out to join them.
As their recollections took shape, the four men learned why their roaring campfire had seemed to burn out so quickly. To those who investigate abduction cases, it's known as missing time. Perhaps as much as 3 hours had passed during the abduction, from the time the men first saw the UFO until the time they found themselves standing on the beach. Meanwhile, their fire had burned down to embers. Hypnosis had restored their recollections of the missing time with unsparing intensity. But now there was no hiding from the memories, no hiding from the trauma of what had apparently happened at Smith Pond.
I mean, every time I had one of these experiences, you know, I would rationalize it as a dream so I could cope with it and say, well, what the heck is really going on here? You know, is it related to my seizure disorder? Is it, you know, something I'm eating? Do I have a brain tumor? You know, am I working too hard, or am I under a lot of stress? What the heck could possibly cause this kind of repetitive experience?
The Allagash Four are not alone. Their story is remarkably similar to the accounts of thousands of other ordinary people who face the nightmarish certainty that they have been in the hands of aliens. Still, despite all the convincing testimony, the subject of alien abductions is the source of bitter controversy.